Autism Quality of Life Podcast, Episode 26. Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Autism Quality of Life Podcast. I'm really excited for today's interview because Dr. Candace Robick is not only an educator, author, consultant, and leader, but she's also the mom to a son with autism. So professionally, Dr. Candace Robick has owned and operated solutions-based learning for the past 17 years, and she researches transition efforts, enabling students to become career and college ready. Personally, she can also speak to what it's been like to raise a child with autism and how it's impacted her relationships with her husband and other individuals in her life. Hi, Candace.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm fabulous. Thanks for asking. Thanks for inviting me on the show. I greatly appreciate it.
I'm so glad we're able to do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so can you maybe start out by telling us how you got into the field of autism and how this whole journey began?
Well, Terry, I got into the field of autism through my son, believe it or not. And I actually look at it as I'm sitting here talking with you today as a blessing. I wasn't sure where I was going with the autism situation when we first discovered it. We knew that there was something going on. But a mother and a father know their children best, and they know when things are not working cooperatively for the child to do their best in school and go through life. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Just noticing that developmentally things aren't quite right, or that you're not noticing what signs you should be seeing.
Exactly. So once my son was diagnosed, I just felt the need to continue to learn. And luckily for my son is I was already a nurse and already a teacher. And at that time that I had my son, I was going to be entering back into the field of teaching. And so I wanted to freshen my teaching skills. And so what his diagnosis caused me to do is it caused me, instead of shutting down, it caused me to gravitate towards educational experiences. I was already an English teacher, and so I became a reading specialist because that was one of the areas of challenge for my son, and I became a special education teacher, and I founded my business, Solutions-Based Learning, and I served as a volunteer for Parent to Parent for at least 20 years now, maybe longer, and it has been wonderful for me. Not only for me to get some information from parents that had traveled before me with their children, but for me to also provide resources to other parents. My son is 20 now, and so I've seen a lot of growth and development. But I must tell our listeners today, it is not always an easy road, and you have to do what makes you feel comfortable. There were many days when I felt desperate by the challenges. And then I always got back to what resources can I use? How can I help my son in the best way possible? How can I make his life easier?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. So it really sounds like you've took the situation that you were placed into with your son's diagnosis and that it really impacted the course of your career in terms of the direction that you've gone in and your work with other parents, helping families. So I guess can you bring us to the current day with what you're doing to improve quality of life for families with some of your work and research?
So basically the kinds of work that I do now are transition efforts. I love to work in transition because that's where it's at for these children. You have to know exactly where the strengths are of the children, where their strengths and weaknesses are, and you have to maximize their potential based on their strengths. I think that that is beneficial. If you wait until the child transitions legally across many states, the transition age is by the 14th birthday of the child according to the independent evaluation program, otherwise known as the IEP. And it's too late at that point. I mean, it happens in the school system because it has to happen legally, but I think that it's important to have parents teach their children different skills in the household, and then to look in the community for a variety of volunteer experiences.
Yeah, so for the families, of course, ideally it would be great to start all of this before age 14 and for a lot of work to take place outside of the school day. But what would you recommend for those who maybe have a child who's 16, 17, 18, or even already in their 20s who might not have had the opportunities to go through this transition process with professionals, really looking at their strengths and examining where they might go?
You raise a great point. A lot of people come by autism and they have no idea how their life will go in that situation. So I work with a lot of teenagers, mid to later teenagers. I'm working with even some 20-year-olds with their families, and we're looking at what they've done historically to shape who the individual is today. And it's not really a problem. I'm just trying to give our listeners some planning for future situations. But if I have a child, for instance, that's 17 or 18, or even 20 or 25, there are some families that shut down and they're not really sure because sometimes the child with autism or the teenager or the young adult is not very motivated to do a lot of things because they might not have experienced success and they might not have been set up for successes. But that's okay. It's all right to just pick up and start wherever you are, and that's what I want to make sure that everyone in the community hears me address today. Because you just look at where you are, you look at an interest learning survey, you determine how that child learns, what makes them tick, what excites them, what would cause them to get up and go every day, and you build from there. If you have the child and you're able to start younger, fine. If not, it's not a problem. I recommend a lot of volunteer experiences and something that the child desires and likes to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just look at building blocks. Look at the different skills that you've given. Are there any chores in your household that you have given that child? Have you walked them through it? Have you explained it? I know this is tough stuff. I know that all of our children on the spectrum are all different ages, all different stages. And it's okay to stand beside the child and teach them how to put the silverware away or how to do basic things. It's okay to develop a visual schedule. That's often very helpful because there are some children that may not understand what it is to clean a dish. We have some children on the spectrum that are verbal and some that are nonverbal, or some that can't communicate what they're going through or how they might perceive their environment around them as a trauma. We do have to be cognizant of the fact that children on the spectrum have increased sensory perception to the point where it can be disturbing to them, and they need to walk away and be by themselves and close themselves off in their room. And that's okay. That may not be something that the parents of the child have ever done before, and that's okay too. But it's all right for the child on the spectrum, the teen on the spectrum, to have to take themselves out of a living situation. The situation is too distracting. There's too much talking. If the TV's on, if the sweeper's on, outside noises, lawnmowers, etc., and just sit with it and just be.
Yeah, definitely. Trying to create those types of experiences in the home or outside through volunteer experiences is critical. And I really appreciate you mentioning how families may not feel comfortable the first time or while they're doing this. It is something new. And so I'm wondering if you could maybe share some specific examples, either from your experiences with your son or from other families that you've worked with, to give us some real life examples of how you've worked with individual strengths and have created a form of transition plan for them and determined what they could do to work towards their next steps.
A lot of people, including myself, sometimes have problems forecasting Will my son ever work? Will my daughter ever work? And those are valid questions. And so you never say never. You can wonder as much as you want, because I'm sharing my innermost feelings right now. Never give up. Just keep working at it. I mean, there were some times when I was raising my son, and at the point of transition age, he had no idea what he wanted to do. So there are many people in our life that don't necessarily know what they need to do regularly, but a child on the spectrum even needs more guidance, and that's okay. So some of the different things, we have a fabulous vocational school in Johnstown. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on where you're coming from, in the greater Pittsburgh area. And Hiram G. Andrews is a wonderful school that has fabulous programs. The students go to live there, and they learn a trade. And so I would recommend that as a resource for parents. Another great resource would be Bidwell. Bidwell is a program in the city of Pittsburgh. Their programs are free. The Hiram G. Andrews programs are paid through OVR. That's Occupational Vocational Rehabilitation.
Sorry, just to add something right here. So the OVR resource and assistance sounds like that would be similar to vocational rehabilitation in some other states. So if families are searching for counselors to help in the school setting, Voc Rehab would probably be a similar resource in your state.
Right. We just happen to call it OVR here in Pittsburgh. You are correct.
Okay.
So Project Search is a wonderful option. We have 2 satellite locations in the city of Pittsburgh, and there are other locations around the country as well. And I know students have been very successful at that program. Basically, the way it works is that upon graduation, students are interviewed by that program and given assessments in different areas to see if they qualify for that program. And I'm going to say whether they're too highly skilled, because in my son's case, we thought Project Search would be fabulous for him, but he was too highly skilled to do that program. The year that we applied, they had too many students coming into the program.
Oh, wow.
So I've had several students pursue Project Search, and it's fabulous. They have regular check-in points with the parent. They grade the students on a evaluative basis regularly, and share that communication with the education system as well as the families. And they rotate through 4 different programs over the course of a year, and the child is able to see which program feels right to them, and their evaluators at the hospital system is able to help them receive feedback and let them know that, yes, you're great at the secretarial work, but more or less behind the scenes type work, but maybe not so much a receptionist. Or you were really good in doing ventilator care, but maintenance didn't seem to be your best fit. So I'm just trying to give our listeners an idea of different types of jobs. They could be escorts, they could be dietary assistants. It's really a fabulous program where the community comes together, the OVR counselor, the Project Search individuals, interview everyone and decide what are the best rotations for that student. And then it's great because the students get to pursue 4 different opportunities, and then they're typically guaranteed a job, and I say that loosely, with the healthcare system.
Yeah, Project Search is great.
In our particular area, it's UPMC. If everything works out okay, the child is normally offered a job through UPMC. But as again, I couch that carefully because each situation is different.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Candace, can you share a bit more about your experiences with your own son as he's moved into adulthood, some of the struggles or accomplishments that you've had, and maybe just share a bit more about your journey transitioning him?
Absolutely. So I would tell you that some of the greatest challenges we had were concerning tantrums at a young age that lasted for a while. People always talk about developmentally the child has terrible twos, but we didn't see anything in the terrible twos. I call them the terrible threes. And then up into his early childhood life through elementary school. There are wraparound agencies that can provide support for families. I just wanted to mention that. There are only 8 states in the United States, they're called loophole states, that offer those services in some of our states. So if you need more information, please contact me. There are some states that will not be familiar with the term wraparound, but it's basically where you have support come into the household and you have a behavior specialist consultant, which is a master's degree individual, and a therapeutic staff support team member that will offer daily support for the child and for the family. And they qualify for a certain number of hours based on what's going on, based on the evaluation, which is conducted by a psychologist. There is a program called Access, and any child in the state of PA with a disability is entitled to access. And that basically just means that if your doctor takes health insurance, they'll take the access card for your child, and that will relieve you some financial responsibility, because everyone knows that is listening today that taking care of a child with a disability is a huge financial responsibility. And so access is something that would cause your co-pays to be zero.
Okay, so and the access card is something that's specific to Pennsylvania residents?
I don't have knowledge of it beyond Pennsylvania.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard of it myself, so it might be more specific. But that is great to know for our listeners who are in the area, and they can certainly reach out to you, Candace, to find out more about how to apply for the access card.
Right. It's also titled medical assistance.
Okay.
The other thing that we noticed is that the transition situations were much improved with the help of the BSC and the TSS. If you don't have those services, don't worry about it. There are a lot of counseling agencies in your area across the country where you can have mobile therapy services where the counselor will come into the household through different programs. Typically, you have to research what's going on in your county to see how you might best benefit your child. There are a lot of programs, and what I'd like to do today, Terry, is to raise the level of awareness. There are services out there. Sometimes you just have to get connected with the right groups and the right organizations. And that brings me to, Terry, that going through raising a child on the spectrum can be very lonely. You have to reach out and discover resources and be proactive. There are support groups. Sometimes parents can find them very therapeutic. It just depends on the group, and sometimes they could become emotional with it. But if nothing else, even if you just go to 1 or 2 meetings, I can't even begin to tell you the number of resources that you will receive. Because, Terry, the reason I'm in the position I'm in today is because I met wonderful people through organizations in the city of Pittsburgh. I mean, we have CHAD, which is an organization for attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, which is known as ADD or ADHD. And we have learning disability organizations, and then we have parent-to-parent. And parent-to-parent is a free resource, and I highly recommend it. And I'm only familiar that that's in the state of Pennsylvania and surrounding areas.
Okay.
And anyone can call me through that organization. So what we did is we learned to become very resourceful with our son, and we would put our personal selves aside and look at what did our son need and how could we meet his needs most appropriately, and in what type of voice would we address him, and how much wait time did we give him, and when did we release information that would not necessarily be received, such as we're going to the movies, which is something that parents commonly say to their children, but the child on the spectrum may not receive that as something that's good they might receive it as something that's disturbing what's going on in their world right now. I remember, Terry, one time when my son, who was very musically inclined, was preparing to go to a piano recital. And he wanted to take a backpack. He liked to have a backpack on his back. And at the time, I didn't really understand the purpose of the backpack for him. But I get it now because I've been in education a number of years. But when he was smaller, I had no idea that maybe the backpack caused an extra weight on his shoulders. They now have professional products called study buddies and weighted buddies and vests that students can wear. That helps to ground the child and to make them feel more comfortable and secure. Well, Terry, my husband and I didn't want our son to take the backpack filled with toys to the recital because we thought, well, he would not be socially appropriate enough to know what he could take out, what he couldn't take out. And it caused a disturbance in our household, and our family members were shocked. And that's something that I'd like to mention to our families listening today, that it's all right if your families are shocked. They just don't have experience, and it's all right if they don't believe that you have a child on the spectrum. Because I've lived through that too, and you have to go through the process of acceptance. So we didn't want our son to take that backpack to that recital, and it caused a commotion. But I am happy to say that we did get to the recital. It's just, I went with my son that was a year older, with my mother-in-law and my father to the concert, and then my husband brought my son down alone without the backpack. Or at least the backpack stayed in the car. I really can't remember because it was a number of years ago. But actually, I don't know if it would have been so bad if he had just taken the backpack with him on his back. And that's what I want to say to the listenership today. I can actually sit here and smile about it now. When we were going through it, it was traumatic for all of us. But now I have wisdom and understanding, and then sweat the small stuff. That's actually a good little book that was written that's very therapeutic and brings you to accept where you are in time.
Do you know who wrote that book?
I can find out for you.
Okay. Yeah, we can add that to the show notes. So Candace, what are you most looking forward to pertaining to your son's future? So what direction is he moving in now?
Well, Terry, I'm happy to tell you that my wildest dreams have come true. And it's pretty much very immediate. As I told you, he's 20. He'll be 21 next year. And he's actually becoming an entrepreneur. He's wanted to start his own business, and he is a dog groomer. He has gone through a program after graduating from high school and just loves animals. He's having the best time of his life right now. And he's using his disability to his advantage in that he is such a perfectionist with how he works with the dogs. It's absolutely amazing, the skill set that he has, and the tendencies to perseverate on something have been very wonderful because he does the best research, and if the nail clippers aren't the best for the dog and it's not the best experience for him, because he's become a big researcher into ergonomics, because you have to be in the right position or things don't feel too good on your body. It's kind of what he went through when he was in the band growing up.
Yeah.
That if you don't wear the right shoes and if you don't march the right way, you won't be any good. Because, holding the trombone and marching and grooming that dog, and, sometimes some dogs are easier to groom than others, and they're all sizes and shapes. And he buys instruments that are most friendly for his hands and do the best job for the dog. And it's been wonderful to see him grow in his abilities there. I've really enjoyed it. And it's now I can sit back and try to relax and just enjoy that process. It's been a long road, but it's been very rewarding to see the fruits of our effort. And I don't want to just say it was us as a family, but my community, all the fabulous educators and all the fabulous and wonderful people that touched his life, his band director, and his special education teacher, just wonderful people.
That's great. So can you share a bit more about the process then of him figuring out that dog grooming was the direction he wanted to go in? And once you guys kind of decided on that path, how did he find out about the dog grooming school? What was that all like for you guys?
Well, that is a great question. He didn't know what he wanted to do. If the listeners recall earlier, I stated that he was slated to do Project Search. And because he had done a volunteer experience, I believe since age 11 or 12, whatever the local hospital required, the age that they had to be for that job, they considered him to be too highly skilled, which I was totally flummoxed by that. I didn't know what to do with that. And so being in education and being in special ed for years, I knew a lot of people in the community. And so I reached out to one of the OVR counselors that I knew and had worked with. And she actually recommended that we pursue dog grooming. And I remember saying, well, I'm not sure if he's very interested in dogs and cats. And she said, all you have to do is go try. And I said, you're exactly right. So we set up an interview, and we spent an hour and a half in the grooming shop and watched several professionals grooming dogs. One was grooming a cat. And we were there for an hour and a half, I believe I said. And we left there, and this is the thing that always makes me laugh. My son said at the very end to the owner of the shop, well, he said, I don't even know how to pick up a dog. And we all laughed. And so we said, do you think you want to do that? So that's what I was referring to earlier in our conversation. It's important for the parents to know the strengths and weaknesses of their child and to try something. I mean, for this instance, the grooming school was stepping out of our comfort zone a little bit. My son did learn to drive successfully, but I will tell the listenership it was not without failure. There were several failures, and the shop was not close to our home, so we had to do practices with the drive. But that's okay. He did drive himself. We showed him how to get there. It was at least an hour drive on the main highway.
Wow.
And it involved 3 practice attempts. Mm-hmm. And we would, travel with him and coach him. We didn't do the driving for him. We coached him through it. And then the 4th time, he went on his own. But something that I wanted to tell listeners about, I did not know how much of an emotional drain and drag it would be on him just to drive there. And so I just wanted to call everyone's attention to that. I also wanted to mention that going to a training program for 8 hours a day, several days a week, caused him to come home. So you figure 1 hour up, 8 hours of training, an hour back. That's 10 hours, right? It caused a huge cognitive demand, emotional demand, and I think that if someone had given me that information up front, it might have been helpful. Because I wasn't sure what was going on, because he had always eaten dinner with us, and all of a sudden now he'd come in the door and go straight upstairs and go to bed. Oh. And that was it.
Yeah.
He was done.
Exhausted.
He was done.
Wow. I can imagine.
So we got used to still making dinner and putting it in the refrigerator, and then sometimes he'd get up at midnight and eat. Wow. And that's okay. That's okay. And so we've learned what the process is, and we've accepted over time that this is the process, that it's just a huge cognitive demand. With all the sensory input and everything, it's just something I think that I wanted to share with people today, just so they're prepared.
Yeah, it's like stepping into an entirely new routine, different than just going to school every day. And depending on how many hours a day it is, it can certainly be a large cognitive demand and something to consider, and something that probably not everyone is able to do. Finding ways to accommodate for that, shortening the training day. I wonder, do you think that's something you would have been able to do with the grooming school, to work out a different schedule or to potentially change things if you needed to?
Absolutely. And we did call the OVR in a couple times, the Occupational Vocational Rehab Agency, to look at how much cognitive demands was going on and were enough accommodations and modifications being done. We had been told that if he didn't want to take paper and pencil tests, the grooming school was wonderful because they offered accommodations and modifications, but it's a valid concern. Are there enough accommodations and modifications? And is the program too long? Could it be shortened up? And what I'm happy to tell you today is that the program could be shortened up. If, he didn't want to complete 5 days a week, then he could complete it over a longer period of time. My son informed me that there is a different grooming cut for every breed, that's a huge accomplishment to become a groomer. Yes, and they have to make appointments with people that they know that have the certain breeds to get exposure. But just seeing the cut once was not productive. But thank you for asking that question, because that is very important. You have to make sure that you remain an advocate. And listeners, please never stop advocating for your child.
Yeah, that's a really critical skill and something that they can begin working on while in school and carry forward through activities at home or in the community, just to practice voicing what they need, because that's definitely a skill that will come in handy in a future place of employment or wherever they might be. So, Candace, how can our audience reach out to you if they have any questions about the topics that you were sharing today? And are you on social media?
Yes, I'm on social media, Terry. And the audience can reach out to me through Dr. Robick, spelled out, at solutionsbasedlearning.com.
Okay. And that's Robick, Robick. Okay. So before we wrap up for today, Candace, do you have any final piece of wisdom or anything that you'd like to share with our audience regarding your experiences transitioning your son and just reflecting on the journey in general?
Well, one thing that I needed to get back to you about was the book entitled Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. It's by Richard Carlson.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Carlson.
Okay.
I would recommend that families consider looking at the book 10 Things Every Child with Autism Wishes You Knew by Ellen Nottebohm, Nottbohm.
Thank you, Candace. Really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us today and for joining us on the podcast.
So glad to spend time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Hi, everyone. Dr. K here. Thanks so much for listening to this episode with Dr. Candace Robick. I hope you got a lot of value from the episode. So don't forget to check out the resources on Dr. Robick's page in order to get her book recommendations and everything else that we talked about in today's show. If you're not already following Autism Quality of Life on social media, come and find us today on our page and in our social communities, the Autism Quality of Life community. And if you're an Indiana resident, you can check out our Indiana Families community on Facebook as well. We are also looking to connect with people who want to start their own chapter of Autism Quality of Life, either in a state outside of Indiana in the U.S., or in another country, or a territory in Canada. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and I am happy to help you set up that chapter. I'm also really excited to announce Autism Quality of Life is going to have a blog called Insights and Outlooks, And we're going to publish information on topics such as transition planning, caregiving, housing, employment, and all kinds of topics that are really of interest to caregivers and professionals who work with adults and individuals who are transitioning into adulthood. And the blog is actually going to be facilitated by Dr. Candace Robick, who you heard speak today. And so we are planning to launch that in 2018. And it's going to be in the form of our quarterly newsletter. So if you're not already subscribed to our newsletter and email list, please go do so from our website so that you can be sure to catch our blog content. Okay, thanks again for listening to this episode, and we will catch you soon. Bye.